Come closer. You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That subtle hitch in the rhythm of your day, the way a door swings shut just a little too hard, or a dropped object bounces with an unnatural, almost malicious enthusiasm. That feeling that the very physics of your world are off. It starts small, imperceptible to most, a whisper of discord in the perfect symphony of motion. But for those of us who live by movement, who demand control over every twitch and turn, it becomes a horrifying, inescapable truth. If you're brave enough to face the nightmare, join us. Like and subscribe to never miss a moment of the horror that awaits. Chapter 1: The Subtle Discord of a Perfect Machine. In the heart of New York City, where the very air thrums with kinetic energy, Ilara Vance stood. A name synonymous with perfection, a choreographer who sculpted human bodies into living art, each movement a testament to her ruthless demand for precision. Her studio, a sanctuary of polished wood and mirrored walls, was her kingdom. Here, sweat was currency, and perfection was the only acceptable form of prayer. Today, the prayer was for the opening night of kinetic silence, a piece demanding absolute mastery over every muscle, every joint. Ilara watched her dancers, their forms a blur of disciplined energy. Every tendu, every plie, every grand jeté was a stroke in her grand design. She saw not just bodies, but instruments, finely tuned and ready for her command. Any deviation, any falter, was a personal affront. Then it started, subtle at first, easily dismissed. A dancer, Anya, executed a flawless series of fouettes, her leg a blur. But as she landed, Ilara's keen eye caught it, a fractional, almost imperceptible over-rotation, her body twisting just a hair more than intended. Minutes later, during a prop transition, a small, polished wooden block slipped from another dancer's hand. It struck the sprung floor, not with a dull thud, but with an astonishing, almost buoyant bounce, soaring higher than it should have, then higher again, before finally settling. And then the door. The heavy, soundproof door to the costume room, designed to close with a gentle, controlled sigh, suddenly slammed shut with a violent, echoing crash, rattling the very foundations of the studio. A tremor of unease ran through the room, quickly stifled. Ilara, a woman who controlled every variable, dismissed it. Fatigue, she reasoned, stress, the relentless pressure of an upcoming premiere. Her dancers were pushed to their limits, and sometimes the body rebelled. It was a logical explanation, and Ilara was a creature of logic. She pushed them harder, demanded more. The anomalies, she told herself, were simply manifestations of their exhaustion, not of some impossibility. She had to believe that. Her entire world, her very identity, rested on the predictable, controllable nature of movement. The glitches, however, persisted. A dancer's graceful leap would hang in the air for a fraction too long, or a fluid arm movement would stutter, almost imperceptibly, before continuing. Like a skipping record, but in 3 dimensions. Then came the moment that shattered her carefully constructed rationality. She stood before the colossal studio mirror, adjusting a stray strand of hair, her movements precise. But in the glass, her reflection lagged, a ghost of a second behind her, its eyes meeting hers with an unnerving, knowing stillness before snapping back into sync. A cold tendril of fear coiled in her stomach. She blinked, shook her head, attributing it to fatigue, a trick of the light, anything but the impossible. Yet the image lingered, a chilling echo in her mind. her own body, her own reflection, betraying her. The air in the studio grew heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. The dancers, though they said nothing, felt it too, a shared, unspoken dread that permeated every step, every breath. The kinetic anomalies were no longer isolated incidents. They were a creeping, insidious pattern. A simple walk across the room would suddenly feel like wading through thick water, or a gentle turn of the head would snap back with an aggressive force. The natural flow of movement, the very essence of their art, was being subtly, horrifyingly corrupted. Ilara found herself watching them, not just for precision, but for the subtle signs of wrongness. The way a foot would drag just a fraction too long, or an arm would extend just a little too far, as if pulled by an invisible, malevolent string. What would you do if the very ground beneath your feet felt like it was shifting, even when you stood still? What if the air around you seemed to push and pull, guiding your limbs against your will? Ilara, the master of control, felt a terrifying loss of it. Her mind, once a fortress of logical deduction, was under siege. The anomalies were no longer explainable. They were sentient, and they were playing with her. The final rehearsal for kinetic silence began. It was the most complex sequence in the piece, a delicate interplay of individual movements merging into a unified, fluid whole. Precision was paramount, every micro-movement choreographed to perfection. Anya, Ilara's prima ballerina, began her solo. Her movements were breathtaking, a cascade of grace and power. Every turn, every extension was a testament to years of brutal discipline. Ilara watched, a knot of pride and anxiety in her stomach. Then it happened, a subtle hiccup. Anya executed a series of quick, intricate steps, a delicate footwork pattern, and then her left foot, instead of transitioning to the next movement, repeated the last micro-segment, again and again. It was barely a fraction of a second, a stutter in the flow, but it was there. Her foot, her body, trapped in an infinitesimal loop, like a broken record player skipping on a single note. Anya's eyes, visible above her mask, widened in a silent scream. The repetition escalated. The micro-segment became a full step, then two. Her leg, her torso, her arms were caught in a grotesque, accelerating loop. The grace was gone, replaced by a violent, uncontrolled spasm of motion, faster and faster, a terrifying dance of self-imprisonment. Ilara stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't stress. This was an active, malevolent force, twisting the very essence of movement. Her perfect machine, her dancer, was being weaponized, turned into a puppet of an unseen, kinetic horror. The sound of Anya's shoes slapping the floor in that frantic, accelerating loop filled the studio, a horrifying crescendo. Ilara could only watch, paralyzed, as the choreographic entropy claimed its first dancer, turning exquisite art into an inescapable, living nightmare. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was only just beginning. The frantic, accelerating loop of Anya's shoes had abruptly ceased. A profound, horrifying silence descended upon the studio. Anya lay crumpled, unmoving, her body twisted into an impossible, broken posture. Ilara could only stare, the image burned into her mind, a testament to the kinetic violence that had just consumed her. The paramedics spoke of seizures, tragic accidents, but Ilara knew. She had seen the impossible, felt the malevolent presence. It wasn't medical, it was a perversion of movement. Her world of control shattered, replaced by an abyss of kinetic horror. The very air felt thick with an unseen, predatory force. Back in her minimalist apartment, the studio's terror clung to Alara like a shroud. She craved logic, but found only growing madness. Her antique pendulum clock, usually a steady heartbeat, began to stutter. Its swing became erratic, accelerating, then dragging, a grotesque parody of its intended rhythm. A forgotten wind-up toy left on her coffee table began to click. Incessantly, its tiny mechanism, long wound down, suddenly whirred to life, then stopped, then whirred again, stuck in a relentless, maddening loop. It was a sound that didn't belong, a whisper of the impossible in her own home. Her usually graceful cat, Mittens, became another victim. A playful pounce across the rug devolved into a grotesque, slow-motion loop. Mittens would spring, hang unnaturally, then snap back to the start of the jump, repeating the motion, eyes wide with a feline terror Alara understood too well. The horror wasn't content with external objects. It began to find purchase within Alara herself. Subtle, involuntary spasms, a twitch in her eyelid, a sudden clenching of her hand. Micro-movements, yes, but to a master of precision, they were screams of a body losing autonomy, a mind losing control. Desperation gnawed at her. She plunged into research, a frantic dive into neurological disorders, mechanical failures, quantum physics. Anything that could offer a logical explanation for the kinetic madness consuming her world. Her screen glowed with medical jargon, but no answers emerged. Each search result, each medical paper, only deepened her dread. Nothing fit. No known condition explained objects freezing and looping, or bodies twisting into impossible, repeating dances. The phenomena defied every law of physics, every understanding of biology. It was a horror without precedent. Seeking escape, Alara ventured onto the vibrant Manhattan streets. The city's kinetic pulse, once a comfort, now felt like a terrifying, uncontrolled symphony. Then she saw him, a street performer, a contortionist, executing an intricate routine, his body a fluid sculpture against the urban backdrop. His movements were mesmerizing, a ballet of human flexibility, until a subtle hitch. A foot, instead of transitioning, tapped the same spot again and again. The repetition was almost imperceptible at first, a tiny glitch in the grand performance, but Alara's dancer's eye caught it. The glitch escalated. The foot tap became a full-body contortion, then two, caught in a terrifying, accelerating loop. The performer's limbs flailed, his body twisting, no longer art but a horrifying, violent spasm of self-imprisonment. The crowd gasped, stepping back in collective horror. The kinetic force amplified, twisting his routine into a fatal dance. His body became a blur of frantic, repeating motion, slamming against the pavement with sickening thuds. The sounds echoed, a horrifying crescendo of impact, each repetition more violent than the last. It was an inescapable, living nightmare. Alara stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. This wasn't an accident. This was an active, malevolent force, twisting human motion into a weapon. The choreographic entropy, she realized, wasn't confined to her studio. It was here, in plain sight, claiming its victims in the heart of the city. The street performer's body finally collapsed, a broken, motionless heap. The silence that followed was deafening, more terrifying than any scream. Alara felt a cold certainty chill her to the bone. This was only just beginning, and it was spreading. What would you do if you saw something so impossible, so horrifying, in broad daylight? The news reports called it a freak accident, a medical anomaly, but Alara knew the truth. They couldn't see the kinetic horror, the invisible puppeteer twisting bodies into grotesque performances. The world was blind, while she was forced to witness the terrifying unraveling of reality. Sleep became a battlefield. Every creak of her apartment, every distant siren, seemed to carry the faint echo of unnatural motion. She saw subtle glitches everywhere now, the flickering of distant city lights, the unnatural bounce of a discarded plastic bag, a bird's flight path suddenly jerking. Even her own clothes, hanging in her closet, seemed to move. A coat, swaying with an unnatural, repeating rhythm despite no breeze. It was a silent dance of the uncanny, a constant reminder that the choreographic entropy had found its way into the most mundane corners of her life. The spasms in her own limbs grew more frequent, more pronounced. A muscle in her calf would twitch, a finger would curl involuntarily. Her body, once a perfectly tuned instrument, was becoming a discordant mess, playing notes she never intended. The very essence of her identity was under siege. She tried to fight it, to impose her will on the rogue movements, but it was like wrestling smoke. The more she focused, the more intensely the twitches manifested, as if the entity fed on her desperate need for control, twisting it into a perverse form of kinetic torment. Back in the studio, the mirrors, once her allies, became her tormentors. Her reflection, already a source of unease, now seemed to move with a life of its own. It would lag, then snap into sync, then subtly laid her movements, a spectral dancer mocking her dwindling control. Her dancers, too, were showing new, horrifying symptoms, not the violent loops of Anya or the street performer, but subtle, insidious betrayals. A foot unable to hold a precise point, vibrating uncontrollably. An arm extending just a fraction too far, then snapping back with unseen force. The entire company was now infected. Their movements, once fluid and graceful, became unnervingly precise, almost robotic. Too fast, too sharp, too synchronized, as if an invisible conductor was dictating their every twitch. It was a chilling parody of her own choreographic ideals. The studio itself seemed to thrum with this unseen energy. Alara swore she could see faint, ghostly outlines of repeating movements in the air, a residual kinetic echo of the choreographic entropy's influence. It was as if the very space was haunted by the memory of distorted motion. She saw a discarded dance shoe on the floor. It began to vibrate, then slid a few inches, stopped, and slid again, repeating the motion in a slow, deliberate crawl across the polished wood. The choreographic entropy was no longer subtle. It was actively manifesting, claiming inanimate objects. Alara stood in the center of her studio, her own body now twitching uncontrollably, a puppet on invisible strings. In the vast mirror, her reflection remained perfectly still, its eyes wide, unblinking, staring back at her with an unnerving, knowing silence. The choreographic entropy wasn't just manipulating movement, it was stealing her very reflection, twisting her identity into an inescapable, living nightmare. And it was waiting. The choreographic entropy wasn't just stealing her reflection, it was beginning to steal Alara herself. Her body, once a symphony of control, now twitched and spasmed, a discordant mess of involuntary movements. The studio, her sanctuary, felt like a cage, the mirrors 1,000 eyes watching her descent. She tried to practice, to find solace in the familiar rhythm of her art. A simple tendu, a graceful extension of the leg. But her foot, instead of holding steady, began to vibrate, a frantic, almost angry tremor that defied her will. It was a betrayal from within. Her arms, usually fluid and expressive, would suddenly jerk, a sharp, uncontrolled movement disrupting the flow. It was like a marionette whose strings were being tugged by an unseen, malevolent hand, marking her every attempt at precision. A pirouette, a simple turn, became a battle. Her body would freeze mid-spin, locked in an agonizing pose, muscles screaming against the unseen force holding her captive. Then, just as suddenly, it would release, sending her stumbling. Even her pointe shoes seemed to have a life of their own. Left on the floor, they would tap, 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 a relentless, rhythmic sound echoing in the empty studio. It was the sound of a silent, terrifying dance, a performance for an audience of one. She attempted a simple plie, a fundamental bend of the knees. Her muscles tensed, ready to perform the familiar motion, but her knees locked, resisting her command, then buckled inward, grotesquely, forcing her lower into an unnatural squat. The motion repeated, again and again. Her knees buckled, strained, buckled, faster, her breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Her body, once a vessel of grace, was now a machine of torture, caught in an inescapable loop. She collapsed against the mirrored wall, gasping for air, her limbs screaming in protest. What was this? A phantom limb syndrome, a neurological breakdown, or something far, far worse, something that fed on her very movements? Desperate, Ilara sought answers. The sterile halls of a neurologist's office offered little comfort. What words could describe the invisible force twisting her body, making her dance to its malevolent tune? How could she explain the choreographic entropy? The neurologist, a kind but detached man, ran tests. MRI, blood work, all came back clear. Extreme stress, he concluded, his voice calm, dismissive. Rest. Take a break from the studio, Ms. Vance. Rest? How could she rest when her own body was rebelling, when every muscle, every joint felt like a foreign entity? His words were a slap, a dismissal of the terrifying reality she was living. They saw nothing, understood nothing. The diagnosis fueled her paranoia. If it wasn't physical, then what was it? An unseen puppeteer pulling her strings, laughing at her desperate attempts to regain control. She felt watched, judged, even by the empty air in her apartment. Her reflection became her greatest enemy. It would mimic her, then subtly distort, a chilling parody of her own movements. Sometimes it would move before she did, a silent, knowing harbinger of the betrayal to come. It was her, yet not her. She isolated herself. Her dancers, once her extensions, now felt like potential vectors for this unseen horror. She couldn't risk them, couldn't risk their movements becoming corrupted, uncontrollable. She was alone in this terrifying dance. The subtle twitches escalated. Her fingers would curl, her shoulders would shrug, her head would snap to the side. Her body was a battlefield, a constant war between her will and the insidious force that sought to possess her. Even when she tried to remain still, the movements persisted. Her foot would tap, 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 a relentless rhythm against the floor. It was a constant, maddening reminder that her bodily autonomy was slipping away, piece by agonizing peace. One night, in a desperate attempt to reclaim what was hers, Elara returned to the studio. She would dance. She would force her body to obey. She would show this unseen entity that she, Elara Vance, was still the master of her own movements. She began her solo, a piece of her own creation, a testament to fluidity and control. But almost immediately, her arms snapped outward, her fingers splaying, twisting into an unnatural, agonizing shape, a grotesque mockery of her art. Her legs followed, locking into a wide, impassable stance, her knees hyperextending, her ankles twisting. It was a dancer's nightmare, every joint pushed beyond its limit, held captive by an unseen, malevolent force. The movements accelerated. Her body began to spin faster and faster, a terrifying, uncontrolled pirouette. Her limbs flailed, twisting into agonizing shapes, a parody of her art, a dance of pure torment. She was losing herself. Her head snapped back, her spine arching, then snapping forward, repeating the violent motion. Her muscles screamed, tearing, protesting. This wasn't a dance. It was an execution, her body the instrument of its own destruction. She was thrashing now, her body slamming against the polished floor, a sickening rhythm of impact. The choreographic entropy was forcing her into its own lethal routine, pushing her to her breaking point, then beyond. The pain was immense, a searing agony that consumed her. Her vision blurred, the studio lights streaking. She was no longer Elara Vance, choreographer. She was a puppet, a broken toy, dancing to a tune only the entity could hear. Then, as abruptly as it began, the violent dance ceased. Elara lay crumpled, her body a testament to the brutal performance, every muscle screaming. But even in stillness, a single finger on her right hand began to twitch, twitch, twitch. She dragged herself away, her body a ruin. In the vast mirror, her reflection remained perfectly still, its eyes wide and unblinking above the mask, staring directly at her, then impassibly at *U*, with an unnerving, knowing silence. The choreographic entropy had not just taken her body, it had claimed her very image, and now it was watching and waiting. The reflection, her reflection, staring not at her, but at *U*, a silent, knowing gaze from behind the mask. It wasn't just Elara's body being corrupted, it was her very perception of reality. The choreographic entropy had warped the fabric of her world, and now it was inviting *U* into its twisted dance. Elara stumbled through her apartment, every muscle screaming, the phantom twitch of her finger a constant reminder. The neurologist had dismissed her, but the terror was real. She needed answers, not medical but metaphysical, something ancient, something forgotten. She delved into the digital abyss, past medical journals and scientific papers, into the fringe. Obscure forums, forgotten academic archives, digitized texts from centuries past. She searched for anything that hinted at unnatural motion, at sentient forces manipulating the physical world. And then a whisper, a fragmented account from a long-dead scholar buried deep in a digitized manuscript. Choreographic entropy. The words resonated, chilling her to the bone. An ancient, disembodied kinetic entity feeding on purposeful movement. It wasn't just manipulating motion. It was * feeding * on it, converting purposeful movement into chaotic, destructive energy. Every graceful plie, every precise leap, every deliberate step she had ever taken had been a meal for this unseen horror. The entity's tendrils extended beyond her body, beyond the studio. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of stillness, began to stir. A faint creak, then a groan, the subtle hum of something unseen vibrating through the floorboards. The first was the kitchen door. It swung shut with a gentle click, then slowly, deliberately swung open again. No breeze, no one there. It repeated the motion, a silent, marking dance of hinges and wood. Then the furniture. A heavy armchair in the living room, solid and still for years, scraped across the polished floor, leaving a faint gouge. A low, grating sound, like bones shifting in an old grave. Small, forgotten objects began to hum. A ceramic mug on her desk, a forgotten pen, vibrated incessantly, creating a low, maddening drone. It was a chorus of unseen kinetic energy, a constant reminder. If it fed on movement, she reasoned, then stillness was her weapon. She tried to impose absolute immobility on herself, on her surroundings, a desperate attempt to starve the entity. But the entropy was cunning. Her attempts at stillness seemed to provoke it. The air around her grew thick, charged. The more she resisted movement, the more violent the kinetic outbursts became. A book high on a shelf suddenly shot across the room, slamming into the opposite wall with a sickening thud. It wasn't just moving, it was being thrown, with force, with malice. It wasn't enough to simply exist. She felt its presence, its awareness. It knew her thoughts, her desperation. It was a predator toying with its prey. What would you do if you knew something was watching your every thought, every fear? In a moment of madness, or perhaps desperate bravery, Alara whispered into the oppressive silence, "What do you want?" Her voice was a fragile thread, easily broken. She waited, heart hammering. The response was immediate. A violent tremor ran through the floor. Unseen hands seemed to strike the walls around her, a rapid, echoing series of impacts, like a drum solo of terror, each blow rattling her very bones. Her home was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield, a cage of kinetic torment. Every creak, every shift, every vibration was a direct message from the entity, a message of its growing, undeniable power. She saw her dance trophies gleaming on a shelf, symbols of her life's work. Her eyes fixated on the largest, a golden statuette, a testament to her first grand achievement. It began to tremble. The trembling intensified, becoming a violent shudder. Then it began to slide, slowly at first, inching towards the edge of the shelf. A deliberate, marking motion, as if being pushed by an invisible finger. It was a direct assault on her identity, on her desperate need for control. The choreographic entropy was not just destroying her world, it was marking her very essence, her life's purpose, with every inch that trophy moved. Then a sudden, violent lurch. The statuette didn't just fall, it was hurled. It slammed into the wall, followed by others, a cascade of gold and shattered porcelain, a brutal, kinetic explosion. Her mementos, her awards, her life's achievements were obliterated. Each shattering sound was a blow to her soul, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by the unseen force, a cruel performance just for her. The debris didn't settle. Shards of glass, pieces of wood, fragments of metal began to slide, to vibrate, to spin on the floor. A vortex of destruction, growing in intensity, surrounding her. The shattered pieces, once inert, became active. They scraped against each other, spinning faster, some lifting slightly as if eager to strike. The air hummed with kinetic malevolence, a low, predatory growl. Ilara stood paralyzed, surrounded by the violently moving, shattered remnants of her life. Every surface, every object was now a potential weapon, animated by the entropy. She was trapped, a solitary, horrified figure. The choreographic entropy wasn't just destroying her possessions, it was creating a new, inescapable environment of perpetual hostile motion. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was now a living, breathing machine of terror, and she was trapped within its lethal, unceasing dance. What would you do if your own home turned against you, every object a weapon in an unseen hand? The apartment, a kinetic vortex, became her tomb. Ilara scrambled out, battered, leaving shattered remnants, but the terror followed. The city, once vibrant, now felt like a vast, open-air cage. The city hummed, but to Ilara it was dread. Every siren, every subway carried a discordant note, a tremor of wrongness. She saw it everywhere, the choreographic entropy spreading through New York's kinetic pulse. News reports began. A taxi's wheels spun violently, faster, until the axles snapped with a shriek. Drivers baffled, mechanics stumped. They called it mechanical failure. Ilara knew better. Then came the pedestrian. He stumbled, but didn't stop. He fell again and again, repeating the motion in a gruesome, accelerating loop, slamming into concrete. A horrifying, inescapable dance. A construction crane, its arms swinging with unnatural momentum, faster than allowed, a terrifying pendulum of steel. It smashed into a wall, then swung back, repeating the arc. A monstrous, kinetic nightmare. Ilara felt the city's terror mirroring her unraveling mind. The subtle glitches screamed for attention. Her paranoia, once a whisper, became a roaring gale, tearing through her sanity. The world was unhinging. Even walking was torment. Her legs would stiffen, steps faltering, arms jerking, forcing her off balance. Her body, once her temple, now a constant reminder of the unseen enemy, dictating her every move. The entity's presence began to manifest visually. Shimmering heat hazes, like distortions above hot asphalt, appeared in her peripheral vision. Not just outside, but indoors, twisting the air into wavering, unsettling forms. And the sound, an unbearable, deep humming, vibrating through her very bones. It was colossal machinery, immense, unseen power, resonating from the depths of the earth. The hum intensified with every anomaly. A car wheel spinning, a pedestrian falling, the crane swinging. It was the choreographic entropy's song, a lullaby of chaos, growing louder, threatening to shatter her eardrums. How could she trust her eyes when the air warped? Her ears, when bones vibrated with an unearthly hum, reality itself blurred, fluid, malleable, at the whim of an unseen force. Her mind, once logic's fortress, crumbled, paranoia gnawed. Every shadow, sound, tremor was a direct threat, a message from the choreographic entropy. She was trapped in a waking nightmare. Desperate, Ilara tried to reach out. Her voice, hoarse with fear, recounted the horrors to a former colleague. "It's real," she pleaded. "It's twisting movement. It's making things repeat." The response was immediate, predictable. "Ilara, you've been under immense stress. Anya's accident, tragic. You need professional help. Stress-induced psychosis, delusional." The words cut deeper than any wound. They couldn't see it. They wouldn't. How could they believe something that defied all logic? Her desperate pleas only pushed them away, isolating her further in her terrifying reality. She was truly alone. The choreographic entropy seemed to feed on her isolation, her mounting terror. The more alone she felt, the more pronounced its manifestations. Her fear was a beacon, guiding its relentless expansion. Her toothbrush vibrated violently on the counter. Her coffee cup spun, coffee sloshing. Even her coat swayed unnaturally. Mundane objects suddenly weaponized, mocking her. She entered an elevator, seeking escape. The doors hissed shut. The car began to judder, not up or down, but in a frantic, repeating vertical bounce, a terrifying, confined tremor. News reports grew more frequent. A bus's wipers stuck in an accelerating loop, scraping wildly until they shattered. A fountain's water jetted, sucked back in, repeating a perverse, liquid dance. The world was becoming an uncanny valley of movement. Actions that should be fluid were jerky, repetitive, or unnaturally precise. The familiar became grotesque, a chilling parody of natural motion. The deep humming was no longer localized. It was omnipresent, a resonant thrum vibrating through the very foundations of the city. A symphony of dread, growing in intensity, a prelude to something far worse. In a shop window, her masked reflection stared. As she moved, it lagged, then snapped forward, its head tilting before she did. It was her, yet it was the entropy, marking, pulling her strings. The repeating loop. It was the choreographic entropy's signature, its cruel calling card. It didn't just stop motion, it twisted it, trapped it, accelerated it into self-destruction. And it was everywhere. What if walking became a death sentence? A simple gesture, a loop of agony. The horror wasn't just in what moved, but in what asterisk couldn't stop asterisk moving. Ilara stood on a corner, hum vibrating, hazes dancing. Then she saw Leo, her former dance partner. He raised his hand to wave, but his hand froze midair, then began to twitch, repeating the same micro-movement, faster and faster. The choreographic entropy claimed another, a face she knew, turning him into its next grotesque performance. Paralyzed, she could only watch the inescapable dance begin anew. The city had become a vast, open-air stage for the choreographic entropy. Every street, every building, every living thing was now a potential performer in its macabre ballet. The omnipresent hum vibrated through the very concrete, a monstrous, unseen pulse. Ilara stumbled through this nightmare, her body a constant battlefield. The twitches, once subtle, were now violent spasms. Her mind, once a fortress of control, was a shattered landscape, besieged by the inescapable reality of the kinetic horror. Mundane objects, once inert, now danced to the entropy's tune. A discarded bottle spun relentlessly on the pavement. A forgotten newspaper fluttered with unnatural fervor. The world was alive, but with a terrifying, malevolent life. And Ilara's own body, it was no longer hers. A simple step would transform into a grotesque lurch, her limbs twisting into impossible angles, her muscles screaming in protest. The control she so desperately craved was a cruel, distant memory. She tried to resist, to hold herself still, to defy the unseen puppeteer. But the more she fought, the more violent the entropy's hold became. It was a perverse dance, her desperate struggle against its absolute command. The entire city had become a vast, terrifying stage, a performance of pure, unadulterated chaos. Every purposeful movement, once a source of life, was now weaponized, a potential instrument of torment for the choreographic entropy. Panic was beginning to ripple through the populace. People stumbled, repeated gestures, or simply froze, eyes wide with incomprehension. They saw the effects, but the cause, the unseen kinetic force, remained a terrifying enigma to them. The entropy's presence was no longer just a hum or a tremor. It manifested as shimmering heat hazes, not from heat, but from pure, concentrated kinetic energy. The air itself seemed to waver, a visible distortion of reality. We move without thinking, don't we? Every step, every blink, every breath is a movement taken for granted. But what if that fundamental freedom was stripped away? What if the very act of moving became a cage? Could you ever truly stop moving, even if your life depended on it? What if stillness itself became a performance, a desperate, futile act against an unceasing, malevolent force? Ilara sought stillness, a desperate attempt to starve the entropy. But even in her moments of forced immobility, a single finger would twitch, a foot would tap, a muscle would spasm. Stillness was a myth, a cruel lie. The entropy retaliated. Her attempts at stillness provoked violent outbursts. Her body would be hurled, slammed against walls, twisted into agonizing shapes, a brutal response to her defiance. Muscles tore, joints dislocated. The pain was a searing, constant companion. Her body, once a dancer's instrument of beauty, was now a machine of torture, forced to perform its own disintegration. The choreographic entropy was forcing her into its own lethal routine. Her every movement was a macabre masterpiece of kinetic torment, a horrifying parody of the art she once commanded. She was its prima ballerina, dancing to her own destruction. In a final, desperate act, Ilara sought the core, not a physical being, but the source of the omnipresent force. She felt its pull, a gravitational center of kinetic chaos drawing her in. She found it, or rather, it found her. It wasn't a place or a creature. It was an omnipresent, unceasing kinetic force. A pure, disembodied energy that had always existed, now fully unleashed upon the world. This was the choreographic entropy, an ancient, unceasing anomaly feeding on purposeful movement, converting it into chaotic, destructive energy. It was the very essence of motion, twisted into something monstrous. The climax, Ilara's body, already broken, was now fully commandeered. She was forced into a final, terrifying performance, her movements accelerating, limbs flailing, a grotesque ballet of self-destruction. Around her, the city joined the dance. Cars spun, their wheels accelerating to impossible speeds. Building facades rippled, windows vibrating. The very air shrieked with the sound of uncontrolled motion. Ilara was no longer Ilara. Her consciousness, once defiant, began to fray, to dissolve into the relentless motion. She was a puppet, a vessel, her identity consumed by the unceasing kinetic force. Her body became a blur, a living vortex of flesh and bone, accelerating beyond human limits. Every joint, every muscle pushed past breaking point, then further, into a state of perpetual, agonizing motion. This was the entropy's masterpiece, not a dance of grace, but a macabre ballet of torment, a horrifying, inescapable phenomenon. Ilara Vance, the master of control, was now a permanent, broken part of its endless, destructive choreography. The chaos was permanent. The choreographic entropy had fully manifested, weaving itself into the very fabric of reality. The world was now a living machine of unceasing, terrifying motion, and there was no escape. Ilara was gone, subsumed. Only the motion remained, a horrifying, kinetic echo of what she once was, a constant, terrifying reminder of the ultimate loss of all control. And now, as you walk through your own world, as you feel the subtle vibrations of a passing car or the gentle swing of a door, ask yourself, is that just the wind? Or is it the choreographic entropy beginning its endless, silent dance, waiting to claim you too? Can you ever truly stop moving?